Okay. Well, as I said, they're my mum and dad, but that's not how you know them. So why don't you start by introducing yourselves, not as mum and dad, and tell us a bit about how long you've been married, how many kids, grandkids, and how did you guys meet?
They got a picture of you and me on the thing, look, love. You look just like that when we got married. I have never looked like that.
Well, hello. We are John and Nicky Gibson. We've been married for 39 years.
It's good, isn't it? 39 years. It's amazing.
When's the big 4-0?
Next July.
Put it in your diaries, guys. Get ready to celebrate.
Party time.
We've got 3 amazing children, 3 wonderful children-in-law, and 4 incredible grandchildren. We met in a church in Bristol 41 years ago, and John would say it was love at first sight. But for me, it took a little bit longer.
You know, there's a slogan, isn't there, which says, "Do you believe in love at first sight, or shall I walk past again?" Yeah, so I actually first saw Nicky in a church meeting, and I was fairly new to the church, and she was out dancing in the worship time. She was dancing, and they used to call it, back in those days, they used to call it tulip dancing, because you did a lot of this sort of thing. So there was Nicky doing tulip dancing with a number of other people. But the most striking thing wasn't the quality of her dancing, was the fact that she was so passionate about God that she wanted to dance before the Lord. She wanted to be so liberated in her worship. And that I found just inspiring and deeply attractive as I looked across the room. Love you.
Oh.
So is that a top tip? Tulip dance?
I don't know about that.
I love it. So you've been married for nearly 40 years.
You've got more to say, Mum.
Yeah.
I would say. Oh, sorry. Did you see the mother-in-law look I just got there? Did anyone? I'll get a look at that on camera. That was a great mother-in-law look. Sorry. Carry on.
So we first started chatting when we went away on a church weekend away. And then when we got back from that, John phoned me. Well, he actually, because there were no mobiles back then, he probably had to phone the landline and ask my father and then say, "Can I speak to Nicky?" So he rang and he spoke and he said to me, would I like to go to the fair with him? However, I'd been to the fair that week with some other friends, so I turned him down, which he forever ribs me for. But fortunately for me, he persevered, and the next week he invited me to Weston-super-Mare, a slightly dodgy beach near Bristol. But so after that, we started going out together. Soon after that, he went away to YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and so we wrote letters to each other, which I bet a lot of you today don't really know what are, but I've probably still got them hidden away at home somewhere, our love letters. So,
Love letters.
And then after a year, we felt that God was telling us we were right together and it was good for us to get married. So we got engaged and got married 8 months later. But the things that I really loved about John, apart from his loving eyes, and his gorgeous smile, was his passion for Jesus. That's really what stood out to me, and his kindness.
Can I go? Is that okay now? Oh, good. So 40 years of marriage, or nearly 40 years. Quick question. This is is it easy or hard? Yes.
Yes, both.
Both. Okay, so if it is hard, so if it isn't just this, because we see the movies and, you know, they kind of go out, they don't go out, there's a misunderstanding, then one of them chases the other to the airport, they finally kiss at the end, then they get married, they live happily ever after. But the reality is it isn't always easy. So if it is hard, is it worth it? What makes it worth it?
Well, yeah, it's definitely worth it. I think, it's like life, isn't it? Life isn't always easy or hard. You know, it's not as simple as that. It's both. Life is both easy and hard. And marriage is easy and hard at different seasons. So there are times when it's tough and times when it's, it's much easier. But it's always worth investing in and being committed to. It's there's a saying, isn't there? The grass is always greener on the other side, and it's the temptation is to try and jump over the wall to someone else's garden. The response we should have is to be investing in our grass. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Sowing more seed and watering our garden and investing in our garden, so that that's what's attractive to us. So I think it's definitely hard, but definitely worth involving God and investing in. I mean, things like sickness, financial pressures, times when the kids are sick or things are going difficult as parents. Those are the tough times, and I think that's just part of life. I do think the other thing is that we made a covenant. Nearly 40 years ago, we made a covenant that is in our minds unbreakable. Yeah. So when tough stuff happens, one thing that's not up for grabs is our marriage. We made a covenant before God, and that is never debated, never considered that we would walk away from that. So I think that's really important. Genesis 2:24 says, "A man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one." When you get married, two people become one, and that's it. I think that's a really important idea. I find it interesting that the Bible says the man leaves his mother and father and cleaves to his wife. In Western society, it's probably the other way around a bit more, isn't it? That the challenge comes when girls are often closer to their parents, and so that can be problematic, I think, at times. But then you could answer that one better than us, probably. So I think it's important.
Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9 to 12 says, "Two people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken." Now, this passage is often used in marriages, and it was in ours, but I think it speaks broader than that, really. It speaks of us as Christians. We're not supposed to live isolated, whether you're married or you're single. You're not supposed to live isolated. We're supposed to live in covenant relationships with one another. We're supposed to have relationships that can support us and encourage us and give accountability for us. So make sure that you're not living in isolation. And that verse talks about God being the third strand of the cord. And I think that is really important, that we think about God being in the center of our marriage. And he wants to be involved in it all the big things and the little details. God wants to be involved. And I think that's what we need to remember, to focus on him in our lives and in our marriages, because that is what will keep our marriages strong.
I'm a father, and I don't know if you remember, but when you were small at times, I had to brush their hair at the end of the day. Mum plats it in the morning, and I have to brush it out at the end of the day. And I can tell you that a three-stranded plait is hard to brush out. So it's a good principle there, right, in your hairdressing. Not that I know much about hairdressing.
Are you meant to brush their hair at the end of the day as well? Because I never do that, I never do that. We wouldn't know. We would.
I think also as Christians, we're called to live radically different lives than the world and to have radically different standards than the world. So we're called to have radically different standards in our commitment, in our purity, and in preferring and honouring one another. And we're called to model the kingdom. So we're called to do things differently in our marriage than people in the world. Philippians 4 verse 2 says, "Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. And 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19 to 20 says, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. So I think those verses make it clear that we're called to live differently. As Christians, we're called to live radically different lives. And for me, personally, recently, God challenged me that even goes down to how I talk about my husband at work. It's very easy to join in with the other ladies at work when they're all having a moan about, oh, my husband never does this, my husband's right pain in the neck. And I felt God challenged me to say, no, I need to be different. I need to honour my husband at work, and I need to speak positively about him. So we really are called to be different.
Yeah, that's so good, I think. I read something the other day that basically said we have to live in such a way that people ask questions. Which means, like, you're so right, we have to live radically different lives so that people around us actually ask the question, why? And if we're not living radically different, then how are people going to know that there's something different about us? And yesterday, Johnny and I had the privilege of going to a wedding. I love weddings. They make me well up every time as that bride walks down the aisle with their dad. It just reminds me of our wedding and that moment, and it just, it gets me every time. But in the wedding vows, it's so nice, the beautiful bride and the handsome groom, and they're all dressed in their finery. They say these lines that are, for better or for worse, richer and poorer, in sickness and in health. And guys, it is so easy to say that on your wedding day. I don't know if you've been married or if you've been to weddings. No one really thinks about that. They don't think, oh yeah, in that time of sickness, in the future, I'll be by your side. But you guys have been married now nearly 40 years. What's that like to live out like in real life?
Yeah.
It's one day at a time, isn't it? And because you're committed to it, because you've made the covenant, you're just living that out one day at a time. And in good seasons, it's great. And in tough seasons, it's difficult. And Nicky's comment about the 3-chord rope, I think, is key. The more you put Jesus in the middle of it, the stronger your relationship feels, the more robust it is. The marriage vows are really before God. And I like to think for us that when we made those vows, it wasn't just us making a covenant, it was God and us. It was a 3-way covenant. And if I'm invested because I made the covenant and she's invested because she made the covenant, then I know he's invested because God made the covenant too. And that's how committed he is to it. So I think that's really important. I would just say that marriage is a season. Do you know what I mean? Now, it might be a long season. It has been for us. It might not be, but singleness is a season. Marriage is a season. I was surprised once to think, over 50% of the population die in a season of singleness. That's the norm when people die, is that they're single. And so it's critically important that we don't see marriage as something we're waiting for before we're married, or do you know what I mean? We need to live the best we can when whatever season God's called us into at that moment. So that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, as John said earlier, sometimes marriage isn't easy, but there again, life isn't easy, is it? And there have been several times where we've had challenges in our marriage over the years. And I think some of you know that John had a breakdown, and we had a few years of him with depression. At the time, we were living in Swindon with 3 young children, and I suddenly found myself having to be the strong one, which I didn't like at all. I was the one that had to make the decisions. I was the one that had to hold the family together. I was the one that had to be there and be the stable influence for the children. I was the one who had to get them up and get them to church, because at that time John couldn't face going. And this was a really difficult time for us and for us as a family. But I was thinking about what really helped me at that time. And I think my relationship with God really helped me. It wasn't particularly easy at that time. I think I probably blamed God, and I was angry with him and thinking, why are we going through this? But I learnt to be real with God in that time. I learnt that God can cope with our anger and our frustration and our questions. And I learnt to bring those to him, and that he can cope with them, and that he will draw close to us in those times. And I also had a good friendship, a sort of discipleship relationship with another lady who I could always go to and ask questions, and she would help me talk through things and help me cope with my feelings. And that really helped at that time.
Yeah, I have a very vivid memory around that time. I mean, I was suffering with depression, and Nicky was having some anxiety bouts, which were giving her heart palpitations. And I have a very vivid memory of one night we were in bed, lying in bed, and we were both crying. And Nicky was crying because her heart meant that she was scared that she might die. And I was crying because through my depression, I was scared that I might have to live. And it was just a bizarre moment. And you realize in that moment that God is there and he's looking after you, and whatever you're feeling, you can be honest about. It doesn't mean the other person is feeling exactly the same or has to be feeling the same, but that God, in your openness about what you're feeling, God can help you to support one another and be there for each other. Nicky went on, after I was ill, Nicky had a period of time where she had post-viral fatigue, and that was a challenging time for us too. You know, physically, she couldn't do very much. I remember going through an airport in America with Nicky in a wheelchair, which seems very strange to me now, but it was just a season of life when things were difficult. And in those moments, you have to keep turning back to God. You have to keep pressing into God. You have to keep saying, God, we invite you into this. We had some financial difficulties around, do you remember the 2008 crash? Most of you probably don't, but there was a big financial crash in 2008, which, had serious impact on us financially. And again, it was another time when you have to just go before God together and say, God, we just need you. So lots of challenges, but it's good and it's good and it's good.
Thank you so much for sharing. And what really strikes me is, I thought this in our marriage, I thought this as a parent, but how do people do marriage without God? Yeah. How do you do, I don't understand how you do that, how you go through things like you guys went through without God being there with you. We had similar things when Tasha was pregnant, especially with Josiah. She was in a wheelchair too, and you guys may or may not know this, but we were on One Born Every Minute. Has anyone seen One Born Every Minute? So yeah, someone's going to Google later. But every now and then it'll come up like in Facebook memories. And what really strikes me is on the advert, Tasha is being pushed in a wheelchair because she couldn't walk. And it was like, I look back and go, that was not an easy time. That was like, the idea of happily ever after was not true at that point. That wasn't super happy. That was, oh yeah, you're in a wheelchair for like this moment we've pictured, the birth of our second child, and you can't, it wasn't happy. It wasn't what we expected, but it was good, and God got us through it. Yeah. It also reminds me of The West Wing. If anyone wants a TV show to watch, it's the best show. It's just the best show ever made. Any West Wing fans? How young are you guys? Yes, I love it. And there's a moment in The West Wing where I don't want to ruin it for you, but the president, he's got MS and he's not doing well, and his wife is getting him dressed, and he's like, so this is why they make you take vows. And she's like, yep, this is why they make you take vows. Because it's not about being easy or good or super, well, not good, that's the wrong word, but super happy all the time. But it is about being good, and it's something God has designed for a purpose. Okay, so we're going to go from one super happy topic to another one. How do you guys get through disagreements in marriage? I assume you disagree? No, never. But you'd disagree with that, wouldn't you, Nicky? You'd say you do. See, that was it. Anyway, how do you get through disagreements? The small ones, definitely the small ones, because they're regular, but also the big ones. And feel free to give us as much dirt as you want. This is a safe space, guys. It's not being filmed. It's not going on the internet. Yeah, how do you deal with that?
Well, yes, it is on, is it? Yeah, there are bound to be disagreements in marriage. Some things you just have to learn to live with, like if your husband squeezes a toothpaste from the wrong end of the toothpaste, or he supports the wrong football team.
Yeah, it's true.
Romans 15, verse 7 says, accept one another just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. So some things we just have to learn to live with, to accept. We don't have to have the same preferences to be in unity. And God is after unity, not uniformity. We need the variety, don't we? Life is much richer for having variety. And there are other things that you learn to love because the other person loves them. Like, I really love going to the beach and could spend days and days on the beach, but John has eczema and going to the beach can be a bit uncomfortable for him. But now when we go on holidays, he'll say, come on, let's go to the beach, because he knows how much joy that brings to me. And because I'm happy, he feels joy too. And more recently, I've been trying to learn a little bit about golf and to watch it and understand it, because I know how much enjoyment he gets from that. Romans 12, verse 10 says, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. So I think the Bible's pretty clear that we're supposed to prefer each other.
She even walked around the golf course with me the other day. I went and played, and she walked, and I scored a birdie while she was which I never get. I'm a rubbish golfer, but I love it.
Did you make a caddy for you?
Yeah. Not quite.
Like, yeah, come for a walk with me. Just carry this golf
carry
bag.
The bags. Yeah.
Wow, that's
it would have been good, though. So, yeah, I think in terms of the disagreements, I think it's helpful to just think about how you and your partner react differently to things. And things that shape that are your parents, what's modeled to you. Nicky and I both had parents who never argued sort of outwardly. Do you know what I mean? They never shouted at one another. It was always very sort of an internal. My parents, often said they never argued in 40 years of marriage or 60 years of marriage or whatever it was. And what we learned was that you just don't do that. The trouble is, it turns you into a sulker. If you don't process it somewhere externally, you just end up sulking, and that can be just as destructive and detrimental to a marriage as anything else. So you need to understand who you are and what your personalities are like. I think it's often, I would say this, conflict is most often because of miscommunication. It's because you haven't actually really understood one another. And as you know, the gap between you feeling something, that getting interpreted into words in your head, that being interpreted into words that actually come out of your mouth, and then get heard by the other person and interpreted into their world and their context. The sort of Chinese whispers of communication, it's so easy to misunderstand what you're saying and how it's going. So for me, one of the things I think is really important when you disagree is don't make it about winning. Don't make it about winning an argument. Make it about understanding the other person and understanding what they're thinking and what they're feeling and the priorities. So really practice good listening. I say that we are sulkers by nature, so we have to watch that. But there is one occasion I really remember when we were in a room in Swindon, and for no apparent reason, I mean, I just apologized, and for no apparent reason, she threw a book at me across the room.
I cannot imagine it at all.
I know. My kids are shocked.
I can.
For no apparent reason. I mean, I had literally just apologized. What it turned out was, you see, I had been told that if there's something wrong, then it's my fault and I should apologize. So that if Nicky ever expressed any kind of dissatisfaction or any concern like that, I would instantly apologize. I would say, I'm sorry. And what wasn't happening is she didn't get the opportunity to express what the upset really was. I was stepping in too early to apologize. Does that make sense? And I needed to give her space and say, okay, let me just fully hear what you're upset about. Let me really understand what's driving this, what you're concerned about. And then at some point in the future, when I've really understood it, then apology is probably going to be right. But I'm not going to cut you off. So out of her frustration that I wouldn't let her talk, she threw the book at me, literally. We've done a marriage course, done it and run it a couple of times. And one of the things that they say in there is when you have a conflict, don't leave the conflict between you, as in, if, just for the sake of argument, let's say this paper is the conflict. If we're having a conflict, it's between us like this. I'm looking at her, but what I'm seeing is the conflict. Does that make sense? And when I look at the issue and her, it's all kind of mixed up together. Whereas actually, if you can get the conflict out there, and we're both sitting next to each other with the conflict out there, that changes the way you look at the conflict. Suddenly, we're working together to try and deal with this thing, rather than she's part of the problem. Does that make sense? And so we often find the best times for us to resolve stuff is driving in the car, because we're sat next to each other, or going for a walk. Because, again, you're next to each other. Things that are problems that you're trying to resolve are out in front of you, and you're in this together. So I highly recommend that as a key to resolving conflict.
Also, I'd like to add that if you sense there is conflict in the marriage, you are responsible for fixing it. Don't sit there thinking, oh, he'll notice in a minute that something's wrong.
Guilty.
If you notice it, you're responsible for fixing it. And you're also responsible for your own feelings. If I'm angry about something John's done or not done, I'm responsible for my anger. He may be responsible for doing something or not doing something that I expected, but he's not responsible for my anger. I'm responsible for my feelings, and I need to take responsibility for them and deal with them and talk through the issue. Also, keep short accounts and don't widen the issue. If you're having a conflict about one thing, don't bring things in from the past. Don't bring in that 12 years ago he forgot to take the bins out, or that he always does that because he's just like his father. If you're having a conflict about one thing, keep it to that one thing and don't widen it. And always believe the best in the other person and want the best for the other person. If I've given John a job to do and he hasn't done it, it's very easy to think, oh, he doesn't love me anymore, or he's not done it because he's so lazy.
It's easy to think that.
Whereas it's much more healthy to think, maybe he's not done it because he's been really stressed at work this week. Maybe he's not done it because it's a bigger job than I thought it was going to be, or many other things. So try to think positively of your partner and communicate to resolve the issues.
That's really... I think One of the things that we got taught in our marriage prep was you should never say never, and you should never say always when you're having an argument. It's so easy to go, you always do this, and like really like round everything into one, or you never do that. And actually that's not true. It's not true that they never do that or they always do that. But we're so quick to say that, and we lump everything into one. And so we've got to be, I think that's really wise advice. Just keep it to the one problem that you're having at the time. Don't bring everything in.
Just so we've got that on record, what Tash basically just said, I never always do something wrong. So it's just good. It's on record. It's on the camera. I'm going to bring it up in the future. Like, just so you know, on this date, you said this at this time. Before I ask the next question, I just want to highlight the gold which was in that last section, right? If you're not married, or if you don't think you're ever going to get married, there was still such gold around the conflict thing there, which is so useful. I was thinking, even if you're in a work situation, some of the things which were said, some of the ideas can be used, like the listening. So not being too quick to say sorry. When John first said that, I thought that was kind of, no, you should say sorry straight away, and be like, I mean it, I'm so sorry, but actually being able to listen someone out on their grievance. You could use that in a work situation when like someone's like, oh, duh, and you're like, oh, I'm really sorry about that, and then they leave feeling still angry. Whereas actually, if they process it, you might get to a better resolution. I think that was brilliant advice. If we skip that question, fair enough.
Okay, so you've raised 3 kids. Hand on heart, which one's your favourite?
You know, there's something about the first, which is always special.
I'm the second, by the way, if you don't know.
And the last child is always special too.
Rude.
And the first one to give you grandkids is always special.
Yeah, that's
as well.
me. Woo! I made it to the top of the list.
You're all my favourites.
Very diplomatic. But honestly, like, you've raised kids and now you've got grandkids. What's that like? Some of us in this room might have kids. Some of this room in this room might want kids in the future. Some of us in this room might hate kids and never ever want them. But anyway, what's it like to raise children? What would you do differently next time, and what went well? Next time, not next time. There is no next time. What would you do differently if you could go back and start again?
Yeah, having children is the greatest privilege, but it's also the biggest challenge ever. And we often joke with friends that if we could have, we'd have gone to having grandchildren first, because they bring you such a lot of joy and far less stress.
They will.
But we do utterly love our 3 children and children-in-law to bits. I think for us, raising children was probably slightly easier because our backgrounds were quite similar and we had similar values. So I do think that's an important thing to talk through with your partner before you get married and as you bring up your children, because it's easy to assume that your partner's going to want to do it in exactly the same way you did, so it's important to talk through those things. And it's important to be in agreement and back each other up. So if John said to Tasha, right, it's time to go and tidy your bedroom, and I thought, oh, she's so tired, I couldn't really go and say to her, just go and have 5 minutes play in the garden and then do it. We need to back each other up, and we need to be consistent. And also not have a good cop, bad cop approach to parenting, and not say, wait till your father gets home. I think as parents, you're jointly responsible, and you need to be jointly responsible for every aspect of it.
I know for me, I found both of you terrifying. But then I just found any time I could have got anything wrong, it's like, as soon as anyone looked at me like, you did that wrong, I would burst into tears. So I don't think it matters. It was just like, anytime I knew I'd messed up, I was like, oh.
I do think one thing that's worth mentioning is we massively appreciated other adults who got involved with our kids, and supported us and invested in them, and for Tasha, there was a couple in Swindon who particularly invested in her. For Jen, there was people in Liverpool, and that's really important. And if you're in any way involved in supporting and investing in kids, that's such a great thing for the parents to get another perspective. A couple of other things I'd just quickly say. I'm going to jump up here. I think apologize when you're wrong. If you get it wrong as a parent, just be honest and apologize. It's often something that we try and avoid at all costs. I think we tried to model something to our children, so we were mindful as we raised them what we were modeling to them, and we tried to model that sense of growing a community. We often had people live with us, and part of that was about community. And we tried to model listening to God and praying and involving God in the decisions we made and being willing to go on an adventure with God and those sort of things. So yeah, I think those sort of things were helpful as a parent.
Sorry, Nicky, I'm just going to jump in because I remember you guys saying, it was definitely both of you once said about parenting that you had two aims. One was to always have a good relationship with your children. And I just thought that was gold when you said it. It was probably about 8 years ago. No matter what decisions they make or where they end up in life, you want to have that good relationship. So if they need you, they can call you because you've got a good relationship, which I think was gold. You got a good relationship, do you think? Oh, good. That's good. Did you think Jen ever phones you guys? No. We had a conversation within the family about who phones mum and dad the most. I won't tell you who it was, but it was very funny. The other thing was, and this really stuck with me, I think this was you, so I'm going to credit you anyway, was to give kids roots and wings. And this is something I really want to take on, that you want your children to have roots so they can always come back, but wings to go where they are called to go and adventure. And I thought that was absolute gold, and we're trying to apply that to our children. So I just want to throw that in there and go, you guys are very wise. So much wisdom.
I think often, sort of in the media, you hear people saying, I just want to keep my kids safe. And I think that's the wrong priority, because our job as a parent isn't just to keep them safe. It's more than that. It's to grow them into people who have both roots and wings, people who are functioning, whole, complete, So I think it's a negative aspiration to simply keep them safe, because you then become just very protective.
That's brilliant. That's really good.
Also, I'd like to add that quality time is no substitute for quantity time. Children need both. So it's important to have the quality time, the daddy-daughter dates, and the one-on-one time with a parent. But children also need quantity time. They need to know that you're there, that you're dependable, that you're trustworthy, that they can come to you at any time and you're dependable. And one thing I particularly remember is that the girls in particular wanted me to be available at the most inconvenient time.
This shocked me when I heard it the other day. I thought this was her favourite time of the day.
Just as I was snuggled up in bed wanting to go to sleep, I would hear a little tiptoe of feet, and then one of the girls would climb in. And that was when they wanted to have a real heart-to-heart and open up and tell me their feelings. And so although it was a bit inconvenient, it did end up being a very precious time.
I still do it to this day if I'm staying over, and I've now learned that maybe I shouldn't. I told her the other day that I think she just needs to start going to bed earlier so that we've got longer time to talk.
So you just need to be available for your children and keep your word to your children so that they can depend on you. If you say you're going to do something or promise something, follow through with it, so that when you tell them that you love them, they know that you're dependable and they can trust you.
That's good.
Again, I think that works on so many levels. Important parenting advice, important marriage advice, though. And also just relationship advice with anyone. You want to be reliable, you want to be trusted. They want them to be able to trust you. And so really, really good. Okay, so we're going to go to this question, which is top tips for success in a marriage. Ready, go.
The top tip is make Jesus the centre. And I could leave it there, really. He really has got to be...
Great, okay. No,
at the centre of your marriage. He is the third strand in the cord that makes your marriage strong. He wants to be involved in all the details of your marriage. So use him, talk to him, involve him. Secondly, talk. Talk about the big things, the small things, the good things, the bad things, your feelings, your hopes, your aspirations. Make sure you keep talking in every season of your marriage. Have fun. Find things that you enjoy doing together, watching together, shared interests, friendships you enjoy together. We've got some good friends up in Liverpool that whenever we get together as a foursome, we always have such a good laugh. And that's important for a marriage. Find other couples that you really connect with and get on with and really can encourage you in God. As John said earlier, face problems side by side, not face to face. And find somebody that you can be accountable to. I think it's very important in your marriage to have another couple that you can go to when you have conflict, or just in general to talk through things. Find somebody that you can be accountable to.
On that, it's really critical to find someone that you're going to be accountable to or going to look to for support when you're not having problems. Does that make sense? So before you have any difficulties, agree we're going to go, and if we have problems, we're going to go and talk to those people because we both trust that what they bring will be beneficial. What tends to happen is people wait until there's a conflict and then they start looking for who they're going to get help from. And inevitably in that situation, I look for somebody who's going to support me and Nicky looks for someone who's going to support her. And then you can't agree on who to go to. So critically important, before you have difficulties, just say, we know that God's in those people, that they speak wisdom to us. And so we're going to commit that if there's a problem that we need help with, we'll talk to them and we'll trust that God brings that about. Can I give you a couple of
Can I also just add, I think, again, that's life. Like, find somebody in your life. If you're dating, find a couple who are married, who are a step ahead of you. And our big advice for that is, like, find someone who you would want their marriage. If you wouldn't want their marriage, don't take their marriage advice. If you wouldn't want their relationship with their children, don't take their parenting advice. If you wouldn't want that person's, like, if you don't think they're living a good life, don't take their life advice. And so everyone should have somebody that they can go to when they're struggling in something and know who that person is. But yes, carry on.
Right. So we're still just talking about top tips. I can't stress enough, believe the best. I'm staggered how quickly people will ditch years of message of I love you, I love you, I love you. One small thing happens and it's you don't love me. And it's like, how can you possibly interpret the situation in that way? So just believe the best. Believe that the other person doesn't mean that thing that feels hurtful to you. They didn't mean it in that way. Assume you've misunderstood it if that's how you're interpreting it, and go and find out. You need to understand different personality types. We've talked about that a little bit. That's very important. Deal with conflict. Don't go to bed on your anger, they say, don't they? Don't go to bed angry. That doesn't mean don't go to bed until you've resolved it. All right? The reality is that often when there's a disagreement, we can't sort it in 5 minutes or 20 minutes. All right? So what we do is we say, we know this is still an issue that we need to resolve, and I am committed to coming back and resolving this. Now, I hope that means that we can both have enough peace in this situation to sleep, because we'll actually be able to deal with it better tomorrow. Does that make sense? And finally, I would say this again and again and again, make Jesus the center of your personal life and your marriage. Passionately pursue him. And that's the best tip for marriage that I can possibly give.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Well, we are running out of time, so can we just say thank you so much to John and Nicky? As we smoothly transition and the band come back to the stage, I just want to pull out a few points because there was so much gold in that. And one of those things is what I'd recommend doing is saving today's video on YouTube. I think you can do that and save the podcast when it's out and be like, I'm gonna save that because maybe I don't need it now, but this is good advice that I might require in the future. There's one thing we kind of had to cut because of time, but I really wanted us to focus on was marriage mentoring is something we think is super important. I know not everyone's married in the room. I know not everyone is going to get married. I know everyone online is going to get married. But if you decide to get married, if you do get to the point where you're getting married, we cannot stress enough the importance of marriage mentoring. Because marriage mentoring is basically, we do it as like a course, 6 weeks of connecting with another couple. So Tash and I will often do it. And at the very start, you'll fill out a survey individually by yourself. And then you'll give us the surveys and we kind of go through it and work out, is there anything really important to talk about right now? And then over sort of 6 weeks of meeting up for dinner, or maybe once every other week, once every few weeks, we'll have dinner and we'll talk through one of those things. And the reason it's so important is the reason John said that it's important to have a couple who you can connect with and invite into difficult situations when you're not angry is because if you wait until you're married, these issues that come up on the survey will definitely come up. Like, there's no chance you'll avoid it. But when it comes up when you're angry, and they're angry, and maybe you're tired, and maybe John didn't take the bins out or whatever it is, or maybe I forgot to do the dishes, or maybe there's something else going on, it's the sort of thing that can explode, right? It can create one of those scenarios where just everything goes wrong and the situation can blow up and it can be messy. But the reason we really strongly encourage marriage mentoring, where you do this difficult process, is because we get to talk through those difficult things in a situation where it isn't explosive. Not necessarily easy to ask those questions and talk through difficult things, and can feel awkward, but so important. So if you at some point you do think about getting married and you're part of our church community, the first thing hopefully you'll hear from me is, congratulations. And the second thing will be, who's going to do your marriage mentoring? Because we think it's vital. So I wanted to make sure that was really clear. The other thing I really want to make sure is clear is Christian marriage, just like being a Christian, being someone who follows Jesus, isn't about our happiness. Not in this lifetime, at least. We've got eternity with God, and that's where eternity in his presence is going to be more happiness than we can imagine. But we don't believe that right now the purpose is happiness. In fact, we believe God's more concerned with our holiness than he is with our happiness. And so whether you're married, whether you're single, whether you want to get married or you don't want to get married, whether it's something you carry around and is a heavy, heavy burden, which it can be, I just want to encourage you that yes, happiness is a great thing to hunger after, but we need, as followers of Jesus, to hunger after holiness. We need to hunger after holiness. God is holy. He is holy, and he calls us to be holy. And holiness isn't something we can achieve on our own, but it's something that we are given as a gift through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so marriage isn't always going to be happy. Following Jesus isn't always going to be happy, but we're not called to chase after happiness. We're called to pursue holiness. We're called to pursue the one who gives us holiness, who is Jesus. So I'm going to pray and we're going to go back into a time of worship. Oh, last thing. We're going to buy John and Nicky. We're going to give them both a £20 Costa voucher each as a gift. We're going to get you another gift as well. But this gift is loaded because I think there's going to be some people in this room who've got questions. And so we're going to give you some money. So maybe they'll be able to use some of the gift voucher to take you out for coffee and to chat. Because we're a community. We're not just a crowd at Lift Church London. Let's stand together and I'll pray and we'll go back into a time of worship. Father God, I just thank you. I thank you for who you are. That you are the true and living God. You're the God who loves us so much that You created us in your image and likeness, and you created us not to do life alone. When you made human beings, you said that everything in the world was good apart from us being in isolation. You created us to follow you together, and whether that's in a marriage or whether that's simply the beautiful thing that is community, God, I thank you that you created us to do life with others. And God, I pray for relationships in this room and watching online, and ones that exist now and ones that are beginning. Maybe the seeds of the relationship have been sown, Father God. I pray that they will be good and strong and healthy relationships. But I pray most of all that all of us will seek holiness first. That we will seek holiness before happiness. We will seek holiness before approval. We will seek holiness before we seek having our desires fulfilled and our aspirations fulfilled. We will seek holiness, that we will desire in our heads, in our hearts, in our souls, and in our minds to be more and more like you, to put you first, to seek your kingdom. I pray this in your name. Amen.